Hi, my name is Jeff H. Sipe, founder and interview coach of PracticeInterviews.com. Check out our website. We have a host of services and a lot of free resources as well. In this video, we are going to cover the technical account manager role for Google Cloud Platform, oftenly referred to as a TAM for GCP. We're specifically going to go right into Google's guidance throughout this video, and we're going to dive right in with the case study component, which is very tricky and very challenging. So let's not waste any time. Let's dive right in. If you like my content, please like. If you have any comments, please comment below. And if you like my overall content, please subscribe. So item one is the RRK case study. And now I'm going to hop off the video. We're going to go right into a screen share and talk through some of these items. Okay, so let's just dive in. I'm not going to read through this entire case study, but I want to go high level and talk through a few important items. So the case study overview. Essentially, you're a technical account manager for GCP and really focus in on that. And the interviewer is going to play the role of a CTO who has a strong technical background. So as we're going through this, a few items that you're going to want to keep in mind are some of these data points, so that it's a SaaS company. They're completely migrated to Google Cloud, the virtual servers, the petabytes, the monolithic architecture, etc. So now that they're running entirely on GCP, they're going to set the stage for a timeline perspective, like they're coming up on peak season. Something that's important to remember is COVID. We're in an edge case, so definitely factor that in. And then it's a planned meeting. So you're going to come in with a plan. It says that it's optional to bring in a one-page document. You are definitely going to write out a one-page document and be referencing it during this conversation. And then the evaluation. This is really important. So we're going to start here actually on the evaluation. So it's going to be recommendations, risks, constraints, etc. And then they're going to be looking for a bunch of these items from communication and presence, technical guidance, and objection and question handling. So let's go to this next slide. So what I did here was I essentially went through the entire case study and I pulled out any important data point. And so this is very, very into the weeds, but here's what I found. I found that there were so many different data points. And even if you look at 17 and 18, look at 18, for example, infrastructure GCP can scale to peak volumes. There's actually multiple concepts there. So if you keep going through, these are some of the items they're looking for. And we get down and there are 44 items. So if we were to really, really get down into the nitty gritty, it's probably close to 50 items that you have to focus in on. But this exercise is super valuable. It's really, really helpful because it helps you understand everything you need to think through. So the last piece is this last slide. So I want you to organize the data a little bit. So in the beginning of the meeting, so this is really setting the tone and stage for how you're thinking about it. So you have that one pager. Obviously, you have a plan. You're going to think about some simplistic introductions. And of course, you are absolutely going to clarify those objectives because the CTO might engage with you at that point. Understanding their role. Again, this is a CTO that has technical aptitude. What does that mean? It means you can get into technical depth. And it's just critical that you're thinking about being a TAM for GCP and always having the lens of working for Google. So, two areas to focus in on: specifics and soft skills. So when we think about all these technical items that we'll scroll down to in a minute, we're going to be wanting to think about all these technical items from a recommendations, risk, constraints, team structure, execution strategies, alleviating concerns, and then creating that follow-up action plan. Those are 7 critical areas to focus in on. And then while you're doing it, you're going to focus in on all of these soft skills. You can see how many of them there are. So while you're thinking about something like risk, you're also going to think about the prioritization of risk. It's a lot to think through, but those are the concepts you want to think through. And then it would all tie back to these company details, these technical items, this is what you're going to want to dig through. This is what you're going to want to establish and talk about. You need to address every single one of these items. The biggest thing to remember with case studies is nothing is left out. Every single piece of the data is important and was put there for a reason. Okay, we covered a lot in that screen share. The number one item you need to consider here is that in order to have success with any case study at any company, you have to practice it. And ideally, hey, yeah, if you practiced it with somebody technically, they could challenge some of the technical skill sets. But even more importantly, you just want to practice it with somebody who asks great questions and is a strong, active listener. And lastly, you want to practice it multiple times. That's going to be really, really helpful for your success. Okay, item 2, RRK interview. This is the more hands-on interview, and Google's really highlighting and identifying 3 items that they want you to focus on for this interview. And remember, with all of these items that we're going to discuss, we're going to think about past experiences, how we've done this in the past, the behavioral side, and then we're going to be thinking more generically, how would we handle it, and how would we handle these items specifically as a TAM at Google. So the first area we're going to want to talk through is the technical side of things. And so some of the items that Google is calling out from the technical side is they absolutely want to see your hands-on technical experience. They want you to have that technical experience in terms of design. They want you to be able to communicate with both a technical and non-technical audience. That's pretty common. They're going to want you to be thinking about things like trade-offs. They're absolutely wanting you to challenge some of the assumptions that are going to come up, and that you're making decisions based on the technical expertise of your audience. That's going to be important as well. And then when we get into the more technical weeds, the overall migration process, infrastructure fundamentals, automation, networking, storage, overall cloud tech and architecture design, and anything else that you can think of that just gets into the cloud weeds, gets into your technical depth and knowledge from a cloud perspective. The second item is program and project management in these RRK interviews. And so Google calls out a lot of items. We'll go through all of them. They call out deliverables, timelines, work structure, organizing cross-functional teams, thinking about milestone completion, progress tracking and reporting, trade-offs, strategies in all phases of the program or project, and then your overall plans and results. And then when you're coming up with these solutions, Google also wants you to consider requirements, scope, stakeholders, resources, risk, priorities, dependencies, and really setting up that contingency plan with strong timeline, design, build, testing, release, and having that really great follow-up cadence. Does some of this stuff sound familiar? If you've watched any of my other videos, it should. It's very close to the program management framework, and so I'll pin a card up there so you can watch through it. The third concept that they want you to focus in on in this RRK piece is the relationship part. So we're always focused on that technical component, and then the kind of process and strategy of being a program manager, because a TAM is really close to a program manager. And then third is all about this communication and collaboration skills. So it's an externally facing role, but you want to think about the client side of things. Then you want to think about the stakeholder side of things. You want to think about overall team engagement, definitely navigating conflict that will come up, solution-based thinking as well. And then they're going to want you to think about some high-level GCP concepts. Just think about things like compute, data and analytics, databases, and where is this going to show up? It's going to show up again in these hypothetical and behavioral questions. So I want to read out just a few sample questions that Google provided for this RRK interview for this role. So some of these questions are, how would you balance and prioritize multiple projects of varying complexity? How do you evaluate the success or failure of a project? How do you handle competing visions when trying to execute a project? How do you handle change in scope, especially during the design phases? How do you handle disagreements among teammates or stakeholders? How do you handle projects without defined end dates? How do you balance process versus execution? And remember, with any of these types of questions, you can change the how question and do a tell me about a time when question. So with that last question, how do you balance process versus execution? Tell me about a time you had to balance process versus execution. It's a great step to take anytime you see a sample question. Just think about that duality. If it's a behavioral question, just change it to start with how. And if it's an open-ended question that starts with a how, just put tell me about a time when right in front of it. The last recommendation I have for these RRK interviews is I absolutely want you to go to the Google Cloud testimonials page. It will just give you such a good pulse on how Google works with its clients, its GCP clients. So go there and I'll pin a card up above to give you that direct link. Item 3, the GCA interview. So obviously this is something that we've extensively covered, and I just want to go back, and for this role, we're going to be pretty rigid. We're going to stick to Google's specific guidance for these types of interviews for the TAM role. So what do they want you to focus in on? Problem solving, critical thinking, your overall approach, and then your solutions. And you're going to understand and tackle these questions by asking clarifying questions. They want you to outline parameters, your framework. They want you to outline assumptions, ideally after your framework and only if needed, and then consider multiple factors or courses of action. Again, this is where the framework is so important. Then, of course, they want you to be data-driven as well. And this is where your assumptions can really be helpful and help you narrow down your focus. And while you're thinking through it, they want you to continue to get that data lens and be thinking about data, really researching and thinking about your overall stakeholders. So one of the things that they also ask for in these GCA interviews is validation. So once you make those assumptions and you dive into your solution, you're validating that information in the solution. Where is it also critical and where does it show up? It shows up in the transition at the end of your solution. So if we focus in on something like risk, maybe we talk through it, we focus on some items like budget and timeline. When we get to the end, we would say something to our interviewer, Sue, like, Sue, we can go a little bit more in depth on budget and timeline, or we can get into those overall results, overall analytics. What do you prefer that we do next? So you're kind of validating that you've clarified that one item of the solution, but you're also building in space for your interviewer, Sue, to lead and guide you. And why that's so important in these GCA interviews is because it's one question, and then they have like 5 to 10 follow-up questions written below the question. So we want to validate that we know the solution and that we can drill down deeper, but we also want to build in space for them so that they can come in and lead and guide us. So ultimately the goal in these GCA answers is you'll have multiple solutions and you'll focus in on one concept at a time, building off of your framework. I'll pin a video up there to help kind of more clarify, more understand this process I'm talking about. A couple of sample questions that Google provides for the GCA interview are, tell me about a time you created a novel solution to solve a work-related problem. So GCA interviews definitely can have behavioral questions. I got one in my interview. And then a more hypothetical type of question, a type of question you'll see very often in a GCA interview. Imagine you are faced with a specific business problem. How would you approach this task? What type of data and metrics might you want to gather before determining your strategy? And how would you evaluate whether your approach was successful or not? Very common type of GCA question. Item 4, Googliness in leadership. Another concept that we have focused a lot in on. The one thing I just want to throw out there before we dive in a little bit is there is a reason why these interviews are commonly done together, why these concepts are done in the same interview. They're very similar to each other. So from a leadership perspective, Google's just highlighting a couple of things. They want evidence of you showing leadership in work. Now, if you're early in your career, like an internship or early stage career, you could use an example from college or from school. They want to know that you know how to mentor and motivate others. and then that you just have overall strong influencing skills. From a Googliness perspective, they want to know that you're team-oriented. They want to know, obviously, that you have success navigating ambiguity, that you have strong interpersonal skills, that you have a strong lean towards inclusivity, and that you have a bias for action. These interviews do tend to lean behavioral, but they can also ask a lot of open-ended questions as well, so be prepared for anything. A couple of questions that are coming up in 2021 on the behavioral side. Tell me about a time you were asked to do something unethical. On the open-ended side, how do you include somebody that's being left out? Very simple, very basic question. Okay, take a deep breath. I almost have to take a deep breath. It's so much information, it's so much guidance. But when you get into these TAM roles, they're going to give you all this information. They're going to really outline it and set it up for you. It's a lot of info. The case study is public information, so I felt comfortable sharing it with you. Just a ton of data, so take it all in. There's some good cards in this video, and leave any comments below if you have any questions. Good luck.